Okay, before we dive in, we have to start with something really important. This is a serious look at one of history's greatest evils. The goal here isn't to find wisdom from a monster. Not at all. It's about dissecting a total catastrophe to understand the destructive patterns that let it happen in the first place. So let's just confront this question head on. And the answer is a hard no. A monster teaches us nothing of value. But the history, the economic collapse, the psychological manipulation, the strategic delusions, that history is a huge warning sign. We're studying the mechanics of failure so we can better guard ourselves against these same destructive behaviors in our own lives. And this, right here, is the core of what we're doing today. We are not looking for strategies to copy. We are looking for toxic patterns to reject. The whole point is to understand the anatomy of a societal collapse, driven by a horrific ideology, so we can strengthen our own decision-making against flawed and dangerous thinking.
To really get this, you have to picture post-World War I Germany. The country was in a state of absolute economic and psychological freefall. We're talking hyperinflation so bad that money was literally worthless. People were desperate. And that level of vulnerability, well, it becomes a breeding ground for a new, dangerously simple story.
What's so chilling is the sheer power of a deceptive story. The regime's propaganda wasn't just storytelling, it was a weapon built on lies, blame, and empty promises. So, let's be crystal clear about the lesson here. It's not to use self-propaganda. The real lesson is to build your financial mindset on truth and discipline, as a shield against the kind of self-deception that leads straight to ruin.
So the bottom line is this. Your actions are driven by what you truly believe. If you tell yourself stories of helplessness like, oh, I'll just win the lottery, or this debt doesn't really matter, then that's how you'll act. The alternative isn't propaganda. It's committing to a reality-based identity. Seeing yourself as a disciplined investor isn't a fantasy. It's a statement of intent that pushes you to take real, constructive steps.
Okay, so once that narrative was locked in, the next stage was the total mobilization of every single resource toward one horrific goal. Every factory, every mark, every person was just seen as a tool for the state's destructive ambition. And this reveals a really dangerous pattern of resource allocation when it's guided by a flawed ideology.
The principle here, if you strip away the terrible context for a moment, is that resources without a purpose are useless. In our own lives, money just sitting in a bank account isn't just stagnant, it's actively being eaten away by inflation. It's a resource without a clear, constructive mission.
Now, the regime thought in terms of armies, troops, and weapons. That's the language of conflict, of destruction. We have to completely reject that metaphor. Our goal isn't conquest, it's security, it's building something.
So while we can look at their model of total allocation, we have to apply it to the complete opposite goal. The question for us isn't how do we arm our troops, it's how do we allocate our resources to build a stable and prosperous future for ourselves and our families.
And this just shows that difference so starkly. Investments are not weapons, they're tools. They're tools for building. They are the seeds you plant for future growth. The history shows us resource mobilization for destruction. We have to learn to use it for creation.
So how do we put our resources to good, constructive use? Well, you can automate your contributions to your future through things like SIPs. You give every single dollar a clear, positive job. This is for safety. This is for growth. This is for my daily life. And the final step is just making sure no resource is left behind, losing its value. This is disciplined, purposeful construction.
All right, let's move to the next phase. With this fully mobilized system, the regime launched a campaign of violent, completely unsustainable expansion. This wasn't just a strategic mistake. It was a moral catastrophe, fueled by an ideology of supremacy and limitless greed, which, in the end, guaranteed its own collapse.
We have to be really careful with this comparison. Comparing a war that cost tens of millions of lives to lifestyle inflation, it's an analogy that just completely breaks down on a moral level. But the underlying psychological flaw of ego and appetite growing way beyond what's sustainable, that's a pattern that can show up on a global scale and, on a personal one too.
These are the universal red flags of stretching yourself too thin. They tell you that the foundation isn't strong enough to support the building. Whether it's a nation or a household budget, when your obligations are bigger than your resources and you have no cushion for shocks, the whole system becomes incredibly fragile, just waiting to collapse. The answer isn't to stop growing, but to make sure that growth is always sustainable and backed up by reserves.
This leads us to a massive psychological flaw in any destructive plan, a total inability to even imagine failure. The regime's plans were built on this fanatical all-or-nothing belief system. There was no backup plan, no plan for retreat, because in their delusion, failure just wasn't an option.
The key thing here is this. Jumping into any commitment without a rational plan for how it might end is just a form of delusion. In finance, you see this all the time. We buy an asset based on pure hype, without ever defining the conditions for selling, either to take a profit or, way more importantly, to cut our losses. We get emotionally trapped by our own need to be right.
So I want you to ask yourself this for every single major financial position you have. What's the exit plan? Having one isn't being pessimistic. It's being rational. It's the one thing that protects you from your own ego and emotions. It grounds your decisions in logic, not just hope.
Because without that predefined exit, you're not making decisions anymore. You're just reacting. You've trapped yourself. You've basically handed over control to random circumstances or the market's mood swings, and that is a position of profound weakness. So after examining all these historical patterns of failure, what is the takeaway? It's not some blueprint for success that we copied from a dark place. No, it's a blueprint for defense, for learning to recognize and reject these destructive patterns in our own thinking.
It really boils down to 4 key principles of defense. First, build a mindset that's grounded in reality, as a shield against self-deception. Second, use your resources with a clear, constructive purpose. Third, make sure your growth is sustainable, rejecting reckless greed. And fourth, always ground your plans in reality by knowing your exit before you even enter.
Look, the paradigm we've been examining was built on a foundation of hate, delusion, and destruction. We're not just contrasting it, we're defining our own lives in direct opposition to it. Your personal paradigm should be built on the constructive forces of discipline, rational strategy, and just absolute clarity of purpose.
And that, right there, is the final crucial distinction. History's darkest chapters don't offer lessons to follow. They offer dire warnings to listen to. True power isn't found in repeating the destructive patterns of the past. It's found in the conscious, disciplined control of your own mind, your own resources, and the future that you are building with integrity.